That never gets old. 1001001100. In binary, that means well, hello. And welcome back to Pencil to Pencil, your favorite Wednesday 8 p.m. live cast with expert cartoonists. That's a mouthful. Welcome back to the stream, you guys. My name is JAMAR Nicholas. I'm a cartoonist, author, illustrator. Leon Extraordinary is published by Scholastic on the graphics imprint in stores now. Volume 2 will be in stores next spring. I cannot wait. I'm sure you can't either. I would be remiss if I did not introduce one of my co-hosts. You may know him in these streets as I got to do the belt motion. The world heavyweight champion of webcomics. He goes by Stone Cold Steve Conley. What's up, Steve Conley?
Hello. You keep calling me that, and I keep expecting like Scott Kurtz to come bounding in with an elbow under my head while in the middle of that.
That's great. Hello. Well, hello. Steve, what do you do?
I write and draw the webcomic The Middle Age, which you can find at middleagecomic.com. It's on Webtoons, Tapas, and Go Comics. And then I do some TTRPG stuff, role-playing game stuff for the D&D crowd, including the Emmy-nominated Intoximancy. And I think I would be remiss.
Wait, hold on. Don't remiss yet.
No remiss?
Don't go into remission yet. Is there still time to vote for your any award?
No, voting. I'm currently Schrodinger's nominee. I am neither a winner nor a loser until Friday when they announce.
Okay, you're in limbo. I get
it.
Yeah. Okay, my mistake.
No,
Continue, please.
And I would be remiss, I think, if I didn't include, if I didn't introduce, excuse me, what did we say last week? In Rice Krispie terms, the Kirby Crackle to our Snap and Pop.
Did you write that down? Manley. I love it. Hello, Mike Manley.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Mike Manley, what do you do?
I do cats.
A word?
I do cats. I do the Phantom and Judge Parker. And today I was working on a...
Oh, hold on. Let me give you the screen here. Hold on. Show that. Wow, Mike, that's a what size is that?
14 by 17, I think.
Pause. That's amazing. Look
I still got a ways to go on it. I got to finish
holy cow!
His chain and
yo, that is worth the price of admission.
I want to do a little spatter on it and stuff like that.
So Mike, you don't usually work that big. Do you?
I do if it's something like that. Yeah, I'll work large. The strips, I do 2 up on that. So.
Wow. Kurt's Pencil says bad AF. That's amazing. Wow, Mike, that's fantastic. And whoever is the recipient of that commission, they're gonna get the socks knocked off. That's
you hope so. You hope so. You know, you never assume. I never assume people will like, everything that you do.
Well, if they don't like it, Mike, I'll take it.
Okay. It's you never assume that people will always enjoy what you do, since I never enjoy what I do 100%. So,
I just had a conversation with Mike Hawthorne this morning, and we were talking about kind of like the state of people who ask for commissions these days. Have you come into people who are like really, really, really like never pleased? Like, you know what, this is great, but could you like?
No.
Could you just?
No, and I never show anybody anything until it's done.
Oh, that's interesting.
No layouts. Here's the pencils or anything.
No.
Okay.
No, I'm not getting art directed.
Okay. No,
if you like my work and you want me to do so, I'm more than happy to do it. But I'm not being art directed.
Oh wow, that's what to grow on, Steve.
Right?
I don't believe in doing that. I mean, it would be different if, let's say, I was painting a portrait, but even then, it's difficult to involve the layman in the creative process because they can't see where it's going. You can't see where it's going in my head. And if you show, I have somebody, a friend of mine, who's a really amazingly excellent portrait painter. And what he would do is he would show someone a rough, and they would be like
here, this is where I'm at.
I don't know that,
Right.
They think the rough is going to be like exactly like what the final thing would be, but just smaller, right?
Yeah.
So what he learned to do, because he was also would do portraits of children and stuff, he would shoot a bunch of photos. He would, and his stuff is very photorealistic. And then he would sort of put it in a photo filter and show it to them. And it wouldn't be that necessarily that far off from what he did. And they would, oh, okay. Because if you showed them like a sketch of their kid, they'd be like, I don't know. That's kind of loose.
Why is it in red pencil?
Yeah.
Right. Like, I'm sure there's a million different ways for somebody to, but I want to assume that somebody that's coming up to Mike Manley knows what they're doing. Right. I think it's very rare that you just get can you draw my, whatever, my dachshund?
Yes, I got one of those last week.
Well, I stand corrected.
One of the scams that goes around, like, hey,
can
you draw my son's dog? Hey, can you draw? I mean, there's like 2 or 3 or 4 of these scams that constantly circulate. One is, I would say when I'm done with that, I would put it up, and someone would go, "Hey, are you a painter? Would you be willing to, oh, I dig it. Would you be willing to do some NFT?" That thing's still going around, the NFT thing. Or what was the other one where they have you do something and then they, for their husband or their wife, never for them, always for someone else.
Somebody else, yeah.
And then they somehow overpay you, and then you have to give them money back. It's like it's one of those like Egyptian prince scams. Hello, you have just won, $4 million, but you got to give me $3,000.
That's the old hold his bag scam in the street.
Bank account, because we gotta put some money through it first,
Yeah, but you just hold this real quick.
Yeah,
that's what happened to Stevie Wonder in that song. He got off the bus, New York City, just like I pictured it, skyscrapers and everything. Then next thing you know, he's in jail.
There are endless scams. Walt Simonson got one, I think, the other day from about a UPS. I get them every day. Every day I get somebody sending me something that has a file in it that I never open. I immediately delete. Hey, I got one today from Geek Squad. Hey, put your bill, whatever, and then they want you to like.
Yeah, that's phishing.
Yeah, no,
don't open that invoice, Steve.
And they go in waves. It really goes.
I just keep paying them. This keeps them off my back.
Yeah.
Kirk's Pencil says, I found. Oh, he got scammed. He got the dog scam. Sorry, Kirk's Pencils. He said, I found out it was a scam when he started asking too many questions. You asked too many questions. Wow. But you know what isn't a scam, dear viewers, is who we have in the green room on deck. Guys, this is part 2 of our fantastic conversation with Joseph P. Illige. We had Joe on a couple of months ago, where he had so much stuff popping. We didn't even get to asking him what he had on his table. We didn't even get that far. But we're gonna cross that ground. And also, Joe's got some cool stuff going on besides all the publishing and all of the comic stuff. He just started a really fantastic new column at Popverse that's really buzzing around the internet. We love to talk about that, the subject matter, and kind of what's next with that. So I know we've had a lot of sequels. This is like the summer blockbusters of sequels. But I'm really looking forward to talking to Joe, and I don't want him to eat all the green M&Ms. Let's bring him in. How's that sound? Pencil to penciliers, let's welcome to the chat Joe Illige. Oh, hold on. Shit. All right, Joe Illige.
Difficulties.
What? Hey, there you go. What up, Joe?
Hey there.
Hey, hello,
Happy
sir.
Wednesday evening, everyone.
Can I first point out, you guys, that I am the white sheep tonight? Look at this. This is like...
That's true. You did not get the memo, bro.
I did not get the
You
memo.
look cool in whatever you wear.
Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
Clear about this.
Just spill ink on your shirt. Smear it around.
Ink, water, or coffee? You'll find out. Really
And that's
soon.
a droid on your...
Is that some Al Williamson?
Right?
Oh yeah. I don't know. Is this if this is a Williamson? This is my
Wow. It kind of
my
makes
scout
me think
scout
of
droid. Yeah.
what I would expect if Jock drew Uniblab from the Jetsons. That's what it would look like.
Get a little closer so I can tell you if it's Al or not.
You just want to see my chest.
Yeah, I think that might
Wow.
be.
This is like an official Star Wars shirt. They probably they take whatever they want.
It's pretty tight.
Yeah, I have one with Chewbacca, one with Darth Vader, and then one with Luke that were all taken from the strip.
Wow, that's crazy. Yo, what up, Khalid? Good to see you. So let's just get to the brass tacks. Joe, you were a fantastic guest. We said we can't end this like this. I can't quit you, Joe Illige.
Oh, man.
We gotta have
Wow.
you back on.
Wow.
So, and I
Have
think
me blushing early in the interview. Wow.
well, and even in the build up, I call them the signposts when we do all the StreamYard stuff and set out the things for the alerts. I put in the description that you have to go back and watch part 1. You need a primer for this because you can't come in here cold. Pause. You got to be ready. You know what I'm saying? And also, I put in a link to your essay to Popverse. So maybe we'll start there. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Popverse and kind of like why it's on the tip of everybody's tongues?
Sure. So number one, I really appreciate the fact that a lot of people have responded to it. So it's a monthly column called Adventures in the Champagne Room. And I was really inspired by, the Chris Rock Levert song where Chris Rock says, there is no sex in the champagne room, right? So the champagne room is really like a myth of glamour and adventure. And the reality is it's empty, right? And so I felt like that was a good premise through which to explore the dichotomy that is the comic book industry, which is that from one perspective, it is the adventure of a lifetime. And from another perspective, it is the destroyer of dreams. And so we're now at a time across a number of creative industries where we're seeing absolute transparency into how the story ends for legendary creators. And for a lot of them, it doesn't end well. How are people surviving in the comic book industry based upon a variety of factors that do not make it lucrative? And we're also at this convergence where you have the Writers Guild of America, where you have SAG-AFTRA on strike, and you're learning just how much money people are not making, just how much health insurance they're not getting. And so it seemed like the time to really have the conversation. And the thing about putting it in a column, there's a number of things. Number one, as a veteran in the industry and someone whose monthly finances are not dependent on the direct market, I can say things that a variety of people who are dependent on the direct market can't say. I can say it for them, right? And secondly, when things are said in hundreds of private conversations, that's one thing. But when it's all focused in one place, in print, that's different. Right? And so basically, it's important to have this discussion. It's important for us to talk about it openly with each other. And I consider this column the equivalent of the first episode of Black Mirror that appeared on Netflix. So if you watch that first episode and the third act involved the prime minister and a pig, and I'm not going to say any more about that. That was a test for your threshold. If you could take that and go to the second episode, then you were ready for Black Mirror. And if you weren't, you could just achieve escape velocity now and go watch Fast and the Furious. So this first column, this was a test. And if you're ready to go down the rabbit hole, then we can continue, because it's not going to get nicer from here. Because before we can save each other and save comics, we have to look at the reality of it. Right? So this is going to be that discussion. And the fact that, you know, what I've really taken to heart is so many people across the socials would say things to me like, I think this every day. Right? Or I wish I had the courage to say that. Right? So that it struck a chord means that this is what we need. And so I'm happy to give voice.
Now, do you really think that today, in the state that the business is in, that speaking truth to power, or whatever euphemism you would like to use, that it would still get you blackballed?
100%. I'm not saying it will. I'm saying it could. And I'm not saying it could through the entire industry, but it certainly could through any given individual or any given number of individuals. That said, you know, it's really hard to say.
Because I mean, I know
we have to have the conversation, Mike.
Right. And you know, we've been having this conversation in some regards through even like places like the Comics Journal.
Yes.
From when I was a teenager, right? Because I was very aware of the fact that like what you're saying, is that long term, the comic book business is not kind to the people, especially of what I call the greatest generations, the people that basically invented everything that we're still driving, right? So I think I was very aware of that. I guess what I'm questioning now is that at the state that Marvel and DC are at, and the fact that probably most people coming into comics are never going to work for either Marvel or DC. And most of the people of my generation are not going to be working for Marvel and DC anymore. Does speaking about this, it's not like in the old days where if you said, hey, you know, so-and-so wasn't fair to me, you would get blackballed, or you would be troublesome. I mean, I had experiences at Marvel when I was there where they sort of let you know, well, if you complain about this, tough titty, basically. You know?
Right.
And I even had an experience working in animation talking to the union about practices at certain companies, and they were like, well, if you complain, basically you'd get blackballed.
Right.
Now, none of those situations today would probably happen in the same way, because everything has been destroyed. I mean, the industry that I started in does not even really physically resemble the industry that I work in now, because the companies are, well, it's not even the same Marvel. This is like the third Marvel now, because it was the old Marvel, the Perlman Marvel, they blew up, and now it's the Disney Marvel.
Right.
Almost none of the people that I worked with on editorial even work at comics anymore.
Right.
So, I mean, I think it's important. I agree with you. I think it's more important for younger people. But I think the most important thing for younger people is to not work for the major companies and develop your own IP. Then you don't have to worry about that.
So I think what the first column presented is the dichotomy, right? Which is based upon your experiences or based on your perception. You see the industry as one thing or the other. And by no means am I pessimistic about the industry. I'm a cynical optimist. And when I wrote the column and conceived the column and talked with Popverse about it, the idea was that always at the end, there would be a sense of hope, right? Because if I did not think that the industry could be better, there would be no need to write the column. It would have no purpose. I would have a defeatist perspective, right? And, you know, when I started in the industry, I was inspired to dedicate my career to elevating the voices of many different people. But what is the point of elevating those voices if you consign them to indentured servitude?
Absolutely.
And that's when I understood that the mission had to take on a different aspect. And to the point of blackballing, which is a reality in any business, I wrote a column for CBR from 2014 to 2016 called The Mission, in which I examined the racist practices of the industry. And after that, I got hired at companies. So I can't look at it from a perspective of fear. I have to look at it from a perspective of, if we present facts and if we have a constructive conversation, then those wise individuals within these organizations will recognize it as such. And I'm at a point in my life where I know that the summit of existence is not getting to work on Batman. And so because I know that, I have a different perspective and I have a different North Star. And that also frees me up to be able to activate this kind of conversation about this industry, which quite frankly, we all love. And that was part of the thing. You know, the core question was, well, why do we stay here? Why do we stay here when we know all of its problems? We can leave anytime we want. Why do we stay here? We stay here because we love it. But the thing is, we cannot let our love be leveraged against us. Our love has to be the fuel that we leverage to elevate ourselves and to make a better comic book industry.
I love that.
Well,
Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
I was going to say that is always the conflict between you, because everybody gets into comics not to become rich. You get into comics because you love comics, right?
Yes.
And your goal is to be able to do the kind of work, create the kind of work that you love, that inspired you to want to get into the business, right? But businessmen know that, and businessmen will use that against you if you're not savvy. And there is everyone will have an event or two at the beginning of their career that sort of opens your eye to the reality of how the business runs. And one of the things that's sort of difficult, and I guess I sort of think it comes down to personality. Some people can make peace with that and do very well with it, like Neil Adams or Joe Kubert, Bill Eisner. And there's other people who can't. They don't want to. Their personality is such that they can't work that out. And I would also say that the business, even 5 years ago, is kind of radically different than the business now, just because of the opportunities and the paths that you have to work that just simply didn't even exist, like Kickstarters and things like that. There are people that are just kickstarting their books and completely having a career that goes around a lot of the concerns that people like I would have working within the mainstream, or you would have working in the mainstream, because they're not seeking to follow that same road.
Mm-hmm. And can I add on to that something that I see a lot, which is probably adding to a lot of the kerfuffles we see on social, is that this new younger generation does not have a problem spilling tea. They don't hold the same kind of water that we do as older people from the industry. Proof of that is not even Comics Broke Me, but going back to Publishers Paid Me a couple of summers ago. That Publishing Paid Me, which is a whole thing where there are young authors who were just saying, yo, I don't think I'm getting paid enough. How much is this guy getting paid? And they threw it all out on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. I think it was L.L. McKinney that started that hashtag from the trade publishing industry. And then, like you said, first of all, that became a big firestorm, and it was a righteous firestorm. But then other people attached to that, and as you said, started going public. And yes, generationally, there are different approaches to how we communicate feelings, our transparency with business, and what kind of expectations we have by putting ourselves out into an echo chamber. So the column is, to me, let's call it a professional way in which to have the conversation, a focused way in which to have the conversation, and hopefully it will offer some solutions, some possible solutions that, again, it's different when people talk about it, but if you see it plainly stated, that may have a different impact on you. So right now, this is a mini series. We'll call it a limited series of columns, and it has a narrative arc. And for everyone who sticks around, I would like to think that it will get some neurons firing in their heads about how they position themselves for career prosperity in this environment, in this industry, or consider other options.
I like this. The column had a quality of the Creator Bill of Rights in the that was kicking around before Image formed, that really inspired what they did. I don't know if it moved the needle on what so much as what DC and Marvel did, but Image took it as a kind of a I don't even say it probably wasn't a foundational document. I can't imagine them all sitting around the table and examining it, but it certainly was in the zeitgeist. It was what it was in the the water they were swimming in at the time, and it helped form what they thought was the right thing to do. And this coming on the heels of The Comics Broke Me, I feel like this is the sort of thing that people needed to see, and more than 288 characters in a way that's laid out in a strong way. And I think that's why, well, for me, that's why I really appreciate it. You said something about saving comics. What does that mean to you?
It means that there is no other art form like comics, and part of where comics has gone wrong for a number of reasons is this aspiration to emulate other mediums, when comics is truly a superior medium.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And comics, above and beyond business, when you think about the origin of American comics, it was created by outcasts. It was created by people who were geeks. It was created by people who had to anglicize their names to escape prejudice. It was created by outcasts. But somewhere along the way, the outcasts became the bosses and started creating semi-permeable membranes that left certain outcasts out. And so the spirit of comics, which was to create a home for uniquely minded people to create inspiring story, that's what we can save. We can save the soul and the heart of comics. The soul and the heart of comics can be greater than the capitalism and consumerism of it, right? So that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying save comics. I'm saying save the soul and heart of this amazing medium, which can do things that no other medium can do, even though these other mediums are not only worshipped more, but these other mediums are galvanizing because of comics.
Right.
Marvel Studios has literally changed business on planet Earth as we know it. And there is no Marvel Studios without the 1960s Marvel superhero comics.
Right.
Now you think about that. You think about the Jack Kirbys, the Steve Ditkos, the Bill Everetts, the people who were chain smokers and toiled at their tables and came up with new characters month after month after month. And these characters, these myths about people who were not heroic that became heroic, people who were vain that became humble, people who were selfish that became selfless, and how these ideas are imprinting themselves into our global consciousness through cinema. You have to understand that comics is the superior medium. It is the origin point. And if we love it so, let's fight for it.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. There's a couple of questions that are starting to filter in. And guys, if anybody has questions for your co-host or our special guest, Joe Illich, please put them out. And our boy Tim Fielder's in the chat, and I'm asking him questions about.
Oh man, Tim Fielder.
We're gonna have to get back to him. I need some clarification. But
Genius.
another one of our lifer viewers, Eternity Forever, says, "How do we start the conversations with the corporations to begin the negotiations to initiate changes in the industry?" Joe Illich.
Okay, so it's interesting. So let's talk about what a conversation is, right? A conversation can be verbal, a conversation can be written, but a conversation can also be an act, right? So if you create art that makes a statement against the art that you feel like is an assault on yourself or on comics, your art is a conversation starter. Art, period, is a conversation starter, right? The part of the essence of art is a dissatisfaction with the way things are, right? So making comics that are different from other comics is the beginning of a conversation, right? What we're doing here, this is a conversation, right? So we're at a time when we have amazing technological capability to make statements. We can make comic books, and we can create a website, and we can make a weekly webcomic. You know, when All Negro Comics was created in 1947, a second issue was never printed because the printers got together and refused to provide services for that book to be printed.
Mm.
And so a second issue could not be printed. But you don't need a printer now to put out a comic book. Or if you're crowdfunding a comic, you can have a direct contact with the printer, and we're not dealing with that kind of prejudicial environment anymore, or at least not an overtly prejudicial environment. And to my knowledge, it's not happening with printers. But again, putting out work as a statement is one way to start a conversation.
All right, there you go. Well, I like that a lot. I also I got some echo. Sorry. I also think there's an interesting conversation there where even when we're trying to enact change from the inside in a lot of ways, or even just having a platform, which is, I think, almost not given enough weight these days, because everybody has a platform, right?
Right.
And it's kind of like, well, you know, why should I listen to you? Or even if you can get through the static to hear it in the first place. I think, you know, as long as we keep having these conversations from an intelligent, professional perspective, and what I really like what you said, Joe, is about we're just not here complaining. You know what I mean? If there's a thing here where we can maybe offer not even suggestions, or at least throw some stuff at the wall to see what sticks, I think that, you know, pushes things forward. You know, I think, you know, we live in, I said this a long time ago. You remember that episode of The Simpsons where there's the crusty doll? Oh, this doll set to evil. I think everybody is just kind of like programmed to be negative, and to switch that down and be positive is a little jarring to people nowadays. You know what I'm saying? So to actually offer solutions, or to say, no, everything doesn't suck. Not everything is on fire. Let's have a conversation about it, I think is now jarring to hear people talk about it.
I would agree. And let's be clear. The world gives people a lot of reason to be angry and to stay angry. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I mentioned in the column is basically the world is putting us in a state of fight or flight every day. And, you know, I'm 53. I turned 54 this year. I was born in 1969. And, you know, a number of people will have this conversation, you know, like, well, my Superman is the Christopher Reeve Superman.
Right.
What's with the Zack Snyder Superman? And it's like, well, here's a possibility. Here's an element, right? The generation of people that connect with the Zack Snyder Superman, when they were born into the Bush administration shock and awe. They were born into a time in which, as soon as they came out of the womb, they were under assault. They live with anxiety on a regular basis. They never had the illusion of good, right? So they're more cynical. They can't immediately attach to the quintessential heart and humanity that was Christopher Reeve's Superman. They might not believe in that. For them, all people are flawed. So their Superman had to be flawed because they've not seen a perfect. They don't have the paragon idea, right? So now take that further is, like you said, there's so much negativity on the socials that positivity is jarring. But because it's jarring, it catches your attention for a brief minute. And if I get your attention in 1 minute and I can hold it and I can say something that connects to you, that connects to your struggle, that connects to the truth of your day-to-day life, it doesn't matter if it's 1,000 people or 10, right? It just matters that there's some kind of connection here so that people know they're not alone. Right?
I love that.
So that's it. Like we've got to remind each other we're a community.
I hope that we don't wind up being the misery loves company community, or that's kind of what our what's going to be on our tombstone. A bunch of people sitting at the corner of the bar trying to outdo each other with who has it worse.
We're not. We're better than that. Comics is better than that, and that was part of the point too.
Our buddy Lee Robinson says that's for damn sure. I like it. So, but Joe, I don't want to turn this interview into like just all of this, which is super important and very apropos right now. But I do want to kind of go back to where we stopped with part one.
Sure.
But maybe we can wrap this up a little bit more because I think there's a little bit more meat on this bone.
Okay.
So Tim asked a question, and I got to just kind of like work through it, and I'm sorry because Tim works me sometimes. So there's two parts here, and I'm just going to put it on the screen, and we can decipher it. Tim says, "Hey Joe, a question for you, but can extend to everyone. Say you're in charge, or say you are not put in charge. What practical steps would you take to fix the direct market, or
right,
possibly further?"
So
if you were president, I guess, what would you do to fix the direct market?
Listen, so the article series is basically going to present some solutions. And the solutions are basically about how people manage their careers. The direct market is an external apparatus. And to answer the question of how to fix the direct market, I would say that's a different narrative. However, it's important that people understand how it works, right? Because when you understand how a system works, then you can start to take countermeasures. And I think part of what's going on in comics is so many people are operating by day-to-day inertia that they don't have the time to really step back and say, and, a good friend of mine who's a highly respected editor, publisher, figure in the business, Fabrice Sapolsky, he and I were having a conversation, and I had a moment because what came out of that conversation was, we like to say something like, this is broken, that is broken. So something that you've heard people say, I'm certain, is the comics industry is broken.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would argue is it's not. When something is broken, it's malfunctioning, it's working not the way it was designed to. But when something is working the way it was designed to, it's not broken. The comic book industry is working the way it was designed to, which might not be the way we'd like it to work. But it is not broken. It is a functioning machine in which the creative fuel, which are the brains and the hands and the hearts of all the creators, are at the bottom of the pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the fact. That has not changed since the beginning of the American comic book industry. And for every success story that you hear about now, for every Raina Tagelmeyer, for every Grant Morrison, there are 99 other people that are just getting by, or 99 other people who on a daily or weekly basis are questioning their decisions. Right? So that's part of it, right? So where we're going to go with this column is going to present some possible solutions for the individual going forward, because the direct market, to change the direct market, you would need a generational shift of individuals. Quite simply, right? You would need a generational shift, and the generational shift would create a modified apparatus with a different perspective.
Right. Yeah.
Now, which individuals are you talking about changing? Are you talking about changing the readers, the retailers?
Let's get some names. Let's get some.
I mean, because it's not just it's three parts. It's the consumer, the retailer, and then the publishers, or the creative people that work within the publishers, right? So you can't change the customer base without spending a lot of money to attract new customers, right? Because the direct market removed it. The publishers removed themselves from the old model of being on the newsstand. Newsstands have basically disappeared because there's almost no newsstands anymore. So the easy way for most of the history of comics for people to find a comic, any store you went, any drugstore, any mom and pop, any bodega, any gas station, you went in, there was a spinner rack of comics, right? So any kid, and they were cheap enough that any kid, they were cheaper than a candy bar.
Right.
So any kid could get 25 cents from their dad or mom and get a comic, right?
Right.
That whole way of doing business is gone now. So
yes,
the easy way for people to find comics, it's not easy for the average 7 or 8 year old, let's say, when most people start reading comics, or that's when I started.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have that old-fashioned feeder where, like, my dad liked comics. right?
Right.
Or you
Right.
might have an older brother or a cousin or somebody goes, hey, here's a bunch of comics, right?
Right.
You don't have that. That whole world's gone now, right? So, and then you have the retailer, and the retailers are not always the best businessmen, right?
Okay.
So, how do you improve the retailer base, but also make the pool of potential young readers, not people with gray hair, which
Right.
is most of the people who read comic books now or have graying hair. How do you bring in the feeder bands that you used to have when it would take it would take millions of dollars in ad campaigns to make people aware, like, oh, by the way, you like Iron Man or you like Guardians of the Galaxy, but then also the material that is made in no way really reflects what the consumer is consuming, right? So if it likes the Hulk, likes Iron Man or any of the Marvel stuff, right? It's worldwide now. If they pick up a comic book, it does not actually reflect what they see in the comics, which is what they see in the movies. So there's also that whole thing from what the perception of the consumer is to what comics are, right? And the format of the comic, which is, in my opinion, too expensive for the amount of entertainment value that you get for a 22-page comic. $4 or $5 is just too expensive. It's too expensive for the average person. So that's why the aging customer base has followed the trend of the price increase from 10 to 12, 12 to 15. They were 25, but even with my little job as a dishwasher as a kid, I could buy all the Marvels and all the DCs that I want. The average kid who would start reading and maybe become a lifelong fan no longer can afford to read the material in any way that the previous generations did. So I see it as a multi-level problem, because you have retailers that are hostile to small publishers, independent publishers. And yet, all the students I've taught for the last 20 years love comics, and they still read comics, but they're not reading Marvel, and they're not reading DC, and they're not reading Image. They might read a little bit more Image, but they're reading tons of webcomics and reading tons of comics online. So there seems to be I'm not sure whether it's a surmountable issue, because it would basically require Discovery and Disney to decide that they wanted to inject millions of dollars into print to try to revitalize it, to capture the old zeitgeist that we grew up with. And what's going on in Hollywood now. They are not about spending money on anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how we solve. I think we can solve the problem of making better comics. And there are a lot of good comics out there. But solving the economic puzzle of the direct market and making people aware and making comics as easy to buy as a candy bar, which is what they used to be. I don't know how you solve that problem without a lot of money, a lot of risk, and those companies are making billions of dollars with very little risk.
So you've presented a lot to unpack, and I'll try to succinctly address in broad strokes. So number one, we've been talking about direct market comics, but the comics that are really selling in high volume in 7 figures and 8-figure numbers are the graphic novels that trade book publishers are putting out. We have a gentleman here who's actually doing a series, Leon, right? We had a visit from a good friend of the industry and comics in general, Jerry Kraft. So when you look at Dogman, when you look at Raina Tagelmeyer's Smile, when you look at, yes, since Leon has been presented, when you look at Leon, when you look at Jerry Kraft's trilogy, starting with The New Kid, when you look at the big Nate series, you're talking about some high volume numbers and books from direct market publishers can be repackaged in different formats. And if they're fortuitous enough to become part of the Scholastic Book Club, then you're off to the races. So we do have comic books that are bringing in young readers and selling at high volume. They're just not superhero comic books. And so, or they're not superhero comics as we may think about them, which is Superman or Spider-Man, because quite frankly, Dogman is a superhero. Dogman is technically a superhero, right? So the money is being made, and to go to the teen audience and what Khalid just presented about manga. So I did a post about a month ago on the socials in which I put 2 books next to one another. One book was $8.99 and one book was $9.99. The $8.99 book was Ultimate Invasion #1 from Marvel, which had 44 pages of original story and some other content. That was an $8.99 book. The other book for $9.99 was Spy Times Family Volume 1, which is this thick manga book of over 120 pages for $1 more. So we're talking about a value perception issue and content as it relates to price point. And we're also talking about, when you're talking about the direct market audience, that's an audience that is to some degree continuing to make their decisions off of habit. Habit is a very hard thing to break. What's also hard is for you to come to the conclusion that your habit is not a good idea, right? And so when I reach a point where a comic book is the same amount of money that I could get a chicken and rice meal with vegetables and hot sauce and white sauce at a corner bodega a 5-minute walk from here, then for me, I have a fundamental problem.
Right.
Because I can eat that meal and it will help me survive and it'll taste good. I don't think a 44-page comic book has the same value. So I'm already going through a mental shift as a consumer, right? And so we have to think about, as an industry, if we want that bigger money, then we cannot expect to bend people to our paradigm. We have to meet them at the paradigm where they are and where they're spending that money. Now, to Marvel's credit, for an example, Marvel through licensing has figured out ways to repurpose and create new content so they can meet the audience where they live. DC has joined with Webtoon and created Batman Family Adventures, which I think is brilliant, right? the absence of what I'll call business logic comes in when you make a $4.99 comic and your goal is to get a 14-year-old to buy it.
Right.
That to me makes no logical sense, right? If you're creating something for a 14-year-old, you need to understand a 14-year-old is not buying a $4.99 comic of your young 16-year-old superhero when, number one, they don't believe in the superhero paradigm. Number two, they don't really go to comic shops and look on those racks.
If they can find one.
If they can find one. And what they're looking for those manga novels that they can go in Barnes and Noble, because those are their soap operas. So to try to encapsulate what it comes down to is all corporations love profit. You know, corporations are run by shareholders, and shareholders are all about profit. But the strategies to achieve the high profit, those are in question. And going back to what you asked about, well, who are the people that we need to change the system? It would be the people for whom changing the system would be a threat to their power. Because people are not hardwired to surrender power for the greater good. And when you presented the equation of participants, you mentioned the consumer, who is the end user, the publisher, and the retailer. But we forgot one crucial variable: the distributor. Because the content,
I should have been
right. The content can't reach the end user without the distributor. So we're talking about a square, and it does bear further examination. You're absolutely right. And I can just speak for myself, where because I've been around for a while, because I've seen certain stories, I've become somewhat disenchanted with the Wednesday Warrior paradigm. I've become disenchanted with comic book boxes. I love bookshelves and I love books. And it takes a really compelling comic book to get me to buy single issues these days. Like really, really compelling, where it's like, man, I gotta have that every month. Because these days, I would rather wait for the book, read it in one shot, and put it on my bookshelf. And let's be clear, I do not mean to disrespect the creators who create the single issue experience. That's an amazing thing. But also, to your point, Mike, the single issue experience used to be disposable entertainment. And somewhere along the way, as an industry, we decided that every single comic book is an artifact.
Yeah.
And it's not. Every single comic book is not an artifact. And that's no disrespect to the creators whatsoever. Every single comic book has the value of good, genuine story. But not every comic book is an artifact. It goes back to when I worked at Sterling Publishing, and the publisher at the time, Marcus Lever, said something, and I'm sure he's not the first person that said this, but he's the first person that I heard say it, and it stuck with me. He said, if everything is important, nothing is important.
Right.
Everything can't be Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Everything can't be Succession. Everything cannot be Watchmen. Everything cannot be Raina Tagelmeyer's Smile. Everything cannot be Mouse. Everything cannot be The Dark Knight Returns issue 1. Not everything is an artifact. Right?
Right. But
Maybe
I want to also inject another part of it, which might be generational. But there's a lot of comic creators who don't want to draw Dogman, don't want to draw Smile, or not interested in. They want to draw, a monster book, or some other kind of, or they want to draw superheroes. That's what they like. So you're basically, those people, and I know because I've had conversations with many, many, many people. It's not that they hate that stuff, but that's not what I do, man. You're asking me to play blues. Well, I'm Led Zeppelin. I don't play blues, right? Or you're asking me to play, a waltz. Well, I don't play waltzes, right? That's not what I do. That's not what I'm interested in doing. And I think that there's a big, huge part of my generation of creators who would never be interested in drawing something like Dogman. That's just not that they hate it or anything. That's not what they do. They
100%. 100%. You're talking about people who grew up on Ramona Fredone, Trina Robbins, Bernie Wrightson, Wally Wood, Gil Kane, Neil Adams, Jack Kirby, Bill Everett, Stan Lee, Don McGregor. They grew up influenced by these geniuses, these talents, who did stories of romance and adventure and horror and superheroes and westerns. So yes, those are the things that they want to do. Those are some of the things that I want to do, and I appreciate those. I just think that somehow the economic model of the presentation of those things begs the question, why does the quality go up? Why do the materials get more expensive? Why do items that are presented as disposable become artifacts, but the creator's wages remain stagnant?
Because they can.
And that's what the column is about. And that's what it's about. It's okay if Batman now costs $5.99 and Ultimate Invasion costs $8.99. Why are the wages of today the same that they were when I started in the business 30 years ago, and in some cases went down?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Why is that so?
And the royalty structure is getting worse, right?
Oh, wow. That doesn't sound like any other form of entertainment. You say royalty structures are getting worse? You mean to tell me that with decreasing sales, the sales thresholds have remained the same, and thus it would be harder to achieve a royalty threshold?
Yeah.
You're telling me that there are publishers that owe creators royalties and have not paid those royalties?
And
no.
you can't examine their books, so you have no idea whether they're being honest or not honest, or they're rounding off in their favor or whatever. I mean, that's one of the things that the actors are striking over, is being able to have an independent.
Absolutely. And the thing is, look, capitalism is what it is. I'm not an anti-capitalist, but capitalism on cocaine, which is what I said in the article, that's the problem. The problem is capitalism on cocaine. The problem is when the creators are not properly rewarded, when the rate of inflation far exceeds the change in their page rates.
And that's not only comics, that's also animation. Because what I was getting paid in the 90s in some cases, if I was storyboarding on something today, would not even be as high as what I was getting in the 90s, right? And now with globalization, which is something else that we face, they can hire a guy in Brazil for less than they're paying me. So, they always come back at you as a creator and go, well, the budget on this book is for this amount of money. So we can't put John Romita and Klaus Janson on this book because the budget could only afford John, right? Or could only afford Mark Millar. It couldn't afford. So they come, not that there's this giant pool of money within the company that they can shift around as they want. They always say that these books have budget. We can only afford this much money. You've got to go before the rate committee now. Now there's these rate committees that you go forward as a creator, which may give you your old page rate, may not give you your old page rate of this book because we only have so much budget for this. They come at you with these. I'm talking about Marvel and DC, not Image. You have so you basically either go like, well, I agree with that and I'll work with you, or I don't agree with that and I won't work with you, in which case they're more than happy to go get somebody else to work cheaper. Younger, not as experienced, maybe not as good, but good is subjective now. Good is probably more subjective in some cases because good is good within the budget, right?
Right. And yeah, and to your point, part of that, and I think this is becoming the anthem, the mantra of our time, is know your worth. And by knowing your worth, that gives you the capacity to make decisions. I was just watching something on Instagram today. It was this video of the actress Sandra Oh, who really blew up on Grey's Anatomy before she would go on to, amazing shows like Killing Eve. And she said that she turned down the first offer they gave her for Grey's Anatomy because she had some basic understanding of her worth and she wasn't afraid to say no, even though it could cost her this gig. And they came back to her with a better offer. Now, obviously, that's not going to work for everybody. And some people have different priorities. So you may say to yourself, well, for the opportunity to draw this 8-page story with this superhero whom I've loved since childhood, yes, I will take my rate minus 20%. But what happens is then you've got to climb your way back to zero. When you accept below what you're worth, you've got to then hustle your way to your worth. Your worth should constantly be going up. The further you allow it to be knocked down, the more work you have to do to get back to zero.
Right. And it also used to be that you could go back and forth between Marvel. If you went to work at Marvel, your cachet went up at DC. And if you left Marvel and went to DC, then your cachet would go up at Marvel. And a lot of artists and writers used to do that, would go back and forth to kind of get a little bit more love. Oh, you think, you don't think I'm so hot now? I'll go over work at the competition. I don't think that really exists anymore within the industry and the way that it did. Also, I think you touched on probably the biggest word in the room that is always there in all of these discussions, which is fear. Right? It used to be in the old days, you didn't talk about your rate. People were afraid to talk about the rate or were jelly of each other. Well, that son of a bitch is getting $5 more a page than me. There was a lot of fear. The companies discouraged it. Guys from that old generation didn't like to talk in public about what their rate was. That became a little bit more open. Young people now on Instagram and on Twitter, they're putting out all this stuff, which is good to know what your worth is, or to know what other people's worth is too. But there's still, bottom line, a lot of fear in the room, and a lot of fear that, like you said, that of people being blacklisted or being looked at as a troublemaker. I don't know whether people get blacklisted as much as they did, because I think there's other ways of doing stuff now. But I still think that there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of generational fear, and each generation probably has a slightly different boogeyman. You know what I mean? If you're 20, your fear is making your rent. Which is a little bit different than maybe when you're 45 and you got 2 kids in college. You got a little bit, and then if you don't have kids, or you're a little bit older, then you're worried about your relevance to the industry. And one of the things that I think about the industry is that it is never good. It has never been good about building up anyone's self-respect. It has never been good as a whole. The fans are the ones that give it to the creators. But I would say that very often I think that the companies are not very good or selective about who that they praise, more or less as a marketing thing, like what they did with Kirby. When Kirby left Marvel and went to DC, it was like, oh, Kirby's here, right? They're promoting that. And then when he left, Marvel's like, oh, Kirby's back, right? They don't really promote as a result of image and those guys realizing their self-worth. The companies now are afraid to promote the creator and to publicly validate their value to the company like they used to. I think that is a very conscious policy.
What you're saying makes a lot of sense, and I feel like, hopefully to kind of open the conversation up to any questions or things. To me, I'm more concerned about the young people who are artists and writers graduating from art colleges and deciding they don't want to make comics. They want to take their ideas and create merchandise and become an automatic business. They do not want to make comics because they're hearing about the financial structures and the paradigms, and it doesn't make sense to them when they can become an entrepreneur, when they can make products, when they can be at FlakeCon and Mocha and different conventions and different outlets, and they can become an automatic business. My larger concern is that we are very close to a generation of creative minds that has no interest in creating sequential art because they have no interest in being starving artists. That is not an idea to them. They don't want to be poor. They don't want to be miserable. And so what I'm hoping is that this conversation is going to speak as much to them, as much to the kind of students that I've spoken to at School of Visual Arts, John Jay College of Criminal Justice, which has a comic book club, by the way. I'm hoping that I'm speaking as much to them as I'm speaking to our generation, because if we're not careful, this medium dies. Straight up. Because it's no longer going to be a business with a model that will attract the bright minds, that will attract the next Noel Stevensons. Right?
So you really think, I mean, not that I disagree with you, but I also think that it's a very rare person that can actually be stubborn enough and passionate enough to work hard enough to do comics. And if you can find something that you find is rewarding, or maybe more rewarding, I mean, I don't think comics will die. I think there will always be comics. I mean, you just look at the amount of cartoonists producing stuff today is far greater than the number of cartoonists who were producing stuff when I was young. So I'm not necessarily worried about the cartooning going away, but I can see younger people making a informed choice that, well, you know, maybe I'll go into concept art, or maybe I'll do this. I mean, we're also facing just the reality of how hard that you have to work, which is not something that most people probably want to do. You know,
well, that's a whole other conversation about discipline and the fallacy of meritocracy. When you talk about how hard people want to work, that's a very specific discussion, right? And we may or may not touch upon that in the column. And I just want to give a shout out to Andrew Colarusso, who is a store owner at a store here in Brooklyn called Taylor & Co. Books. He has a graphic novel section and really great store. And, you know, that's part of the future too, right? More boutique bookstores selling graphic novels for different age groups. So he'll have manga, he'll have the collected edition of Wonder Woman, the Historia, or the compendium of Sandman Mystery Theater. So that's part of the equation too, right? It's the bookstores. And so the decisions that are made now that are going to impact the industry for the next 10 or 20 years are also connected to the businesses. And the businesses are the access points for people to discover comics, right? Like what you said about newsstands. Newsstands used to be the discovery point. Now the discovery point are bookstores. And so we have to, you know, think about that. But, you know, it's funny because, like I said, again, I'm optimistic about what the future of comics can be, but I am concerned about a system that invites young voices to tell their stories here.
I think there's also a kind of like to what Mike's been talking about all episode. There's a lot of generational kind of soapboxes here. You know what I mean? And everybody's kind of looking over the fence of the baseball game from different levels on the other side, right?
Yeah.
Like some people are looking up, somebody's looking through the hole. And a lot of times it kind of just comes down to, well, the kids like manga. Or like, you know, oh, well, everybody just wants Dogman. And I don't think it's that simple. You know what I mean? There's so many other, like every one of these columns has something that goes along with it, a caboose that follows that. And quickly, just some of the.
Oh, no.
Up. Okay. Hopefully we'll come right back. Or one of you will have to field questions. I love
Oh,
the
there he
answer.
is.
any questions. Okay, he's coming back.
Yeah, there
Sorry
you
about that. Yeah.
That's okay. So
I got this new mouse. It's whatever genius designed this put a back button right on the thumb. So I'm like,
wow,
it's not helping
wow,
me. I'm sorry.
that's wild.
I kind of
So
lost.
what were you saying?
So I was going to say there's some really good questions in here, kind of about distribution and kind of like how we're using the things that we already have.
Sure.
So our good friend Rick Hernandez just says we need to understand what are the gateways, i.e., the scholastic book fairs, student book fairs, and who are the gatekeepers? Are comic book stores accessible and friendly to Gen Z and Gen Alpha? So to that point, I want to say, and I've had these conversations with a lot of store owners, and I'm really fortunate that a lot of the shop owners that I know in the Philly area are very receptive to families. They're really receptive to young people coming into the store, and they actually have spaces for them. That's a whole other part. How many of your LCSs do you go to where the only things they have for kids is some folded up Archies that are sun bleached in the window? You know,
No,
what I mean?
You're absolutely right. The two stores that I'm equidistant from, Anyone Comics, basically is set up very similar, kind of like this interesting fusion of a comic book store and a bookstore. But when you come into the store, the first books that you have access to are for younger readers, right? And I've literally seen the owner, Demetrios Fragiscatos, I've seen him welcome families in. It's their first time coming in there. They heard through word of mouth, hey, there's a comic shop in my neighborhood. And he'll say to them, let me know if you have any questions. He'll ask, any given child, what do you like? They'll tell him what they like, and then he'll try to recommend something that's in their vein of interest. Bulletproof Comics, which is the other store, which I'm equidistant from. The owner, Hank Kwan, he's increased the manga offerings, and he's created a manga corner in the store. And so, to your point, spaces have to be aesthetically pleasing, they have to be welcoming, and ideally you have a well-rounded staff who is familiar with the different types of books, because there's no way one individual should be expected to know all the books, right? And I mean, listen, this is a very challenging time for retailers, and that's something that we all know. What does tend to be true, though, is that chaos provides opportunity. And so we can't make the problems go away in the blink of an eye, but how can we look at the conditions and adapt? How can we pivot, right? That's a fair concern,
And one
it's like a centipede, because I do think, because it's generational, you got some legs that are not turning the same way as the other legs, right? You got some parts that are not relating to the other parts. I mean, I just look through my Facebook feed or my social media feed, and I see a lot of disconnect. And because I see young people, young publishers, people like Jamar or people like Steve, and then I have friends that are, mainstream people, and everybody was wanting to do comics, but there is not an overarching connection between, which I think would be very beneficial for older people to learn from younger people, and younger people to learn from older people, and for everybody to learn from exterior voices who are interested in the business, right?
I will say, to that point, I do think there are a few, not a lot, convergence points to speak to what you're talking about. And one of those convergence points are the libraries and the librarians, right? The librarians are very much interested in this growth market that has brought people back to the libraries, the centers of learning. Now, unfortunately, we're dealing with the inconvenience of book banning, librarians under threat for standing up for the rights of individuals as they are documented in the language of this nation. But libraries and librarians, I feel like, are one of the juncture points you're talking about where people from different legs on the centipede can all meet.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because, I mean, I remember, you know, there were times where the only book you would ever find about comics in the library might be like some book on the history of comics, but never, you know, good God, what do you mean a comic book? What are you, illiterate? You know, it's like that was like my whole youth was growing up, was people taking away Mad Magazine or not liking comics. And it's so complete. I mean, even in colleges, right? I mean, all the colleges have graphic novel classes now.
Absolutely. And
You
it's
know,
great. My first exposure to seeing comic books in libraries, I went to School of Visual Arts from 1988 to 1990, and the SVA library was the first library I saw with graphic novels. It was because of the SVA library that I reconnected with Frank Miller's Ronin, that I reconnected with Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' Watchmen, and it was being at School of Visual Arts that I remember I met this girl named Lori, and she said just out of the blue, "Hey, have you ever read anything by Grant Morrison?" And I was like, "Who is that?" And then she explained to me what he was doing on Animal Man. And I went to Forbidden Planet and I bought an Animal Man comic by him. And then someone was like, "Oh, well, he's also writing Doom Patrol." And it had these amazing covers by Simon Bisley. And I was like, let me read that. And then before you know it, I became a Grant Morrison fan. But that came from School of Visual Arts being a, college for artists, but also having a library with graphic novels. And again, this was back in the late 80s. So, that was really a revelation for me. And now seeing that as commonplace it's really amazing.
it is. I'm wondering if one of the places that could use improvement would be the publishers having some sort of outreach. I don't know if they do to the libraries to again, I sort of look at it as you have the big two, which are owned by these big corporations. So their idea is to harvest all the juice from the host. But I don't know. I suspect not if they're actually doing things to reach out to the libraries to get them to increase or to like what are the feeder books? Like, we know Scholastic is the major feeder book that are going into the libraries. All the Dog Man, all the Smile, all that stuff. We know that that's what people are getting into.
Hey, I apologize. I have to come back in 1 minute. My wife locked herself out of the house.
Oh,
I
okay.
have to bring her back in. I'll be back in 1 minute, and then I'd love to answer questions. Okay, I'll be right back.
All right, cool. All right, I took them off the screen. But finish what you were saying, Mike, and I think we can pick that back up.
I was going to just say, what are the feeder books that get you from one? Like, it used to be like, I don't know, maybe you read little hot stuff or whatever, and you would eventually read Spider-Man, and then you would sort of move through. But maybe that model doesn't really exist because it seems like the people coming in are reading Leon, and then we never graduate to the other stuff. How do you find the other stuff? Because it used to be an accident that you would find a comic. I found a lot of comics. I found every comic by accident. You know what I mean? Until I went to the Ivan Gamoto comic book store.
That's the best name of a comic store.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Every comic I found was by accident, just by luck. You would go to the newsstand and like, oh, this week this is what they've got. Okay, I like this, right? It was by serendipity that you would find Commandi or something, So what are the routes or the connections to go from reading Scholastic to becoming a lifelong comic book fan, a comic fan, whether they're comic books or graphic novels? Because it seems like the old model was, they said 3 to 4 years someone would read a comic book, and then the majority of people who read comics moved on, right? And then you still had that little core of people that are now our aging base of the direct market people. So the kids that are reading Leon, what are they going to be reading in 5 years? How are they going to be reading in 5 years? What would they be reading in 5 years? Because I'm not really sure, just based upon my experience with the students that I'm teaching that are teenagers, they don't necessarily go from Naruto to Deadpool.
I think they're two different columns. I think kids who are starting off reading reading graphic novels in their library in their school, or maybe at a library in their town. And if you know this about traditional publishing, there's already channels in the water. There's already like young readers, middle grade, young adult, and then teen, and then adult, and whatever. And that column keeps going up. It doesn't necessarily fold into Avengers. You know what I mean? But that stuff does exist in that space anyway, so maybe they'll glom onto that because they already have an arm full of something else, or like Wings of Fire. The kids love that stuff. Maybe they'll get into reading Game of Thrones later from the genre study. So I don't necessarily think it's going to be going to the comic book shop after a couple of decades.
Yeah, none of the students that I was teaching, or maybe only one or two, actually went to the comic book store. So what I would do when I taught the class is I would lug in this big, giant bag that would have everything in it, from like Bone and Marvel stuff and DC stuff, like old stuff, Kelvin and Hobbes, just to give them like the spectrum of what comic books can be, right? Tintin, Ascaris, manga, whatever. And it was sort of interesting to see what people gravitated to, what they were interested in. I think by default, everyone is interested in manga or anime just because that's what they see the most. I think if all you could see was Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby, they would like that because that's what they grew up with, right? A lot of it is just what you fall in love with I was saying while you were gone, Joe, is by accident, right? Majority of what we find that we like as fans of anything is by accident. One day you turn on the TV and you see something like, oh, that's cool. I like that show. And then you try to find it. The majority of people who, read comics find something by accident. And then they just say, I like it, right? So how do you make that accident basically a habit? There used to be a real easy way for you to find it that was inexpensive. So I still think to your point originally, one of the big problems is the price point. And I know that they had tried in the past to make cheaper comics. But part of the problem was the retailers didn't like cheaper comics because they're making less money. And retailers like Walmart, that stuff that DC was doing, I don't think it was that successful. If you put dollar comic books out now, would they be successful enough to work?
Like penetrate.
Yeah.
And to that question, Mike, or statement, we have a question from our buddy Kirk's Pencils. And sorry about the audio, you guys. We're kind of hitting the matrix.
No worries, there was an echo, but it's gone now.
Kirk's Pencils asks, is technology raising the prices?
I would say technology always raises the prices. Technology is not just circuits. Technology is printing technology, right? So the fact that printers are able to develop different types of paper with different types of effects, these become appealing from a marketing point of view. I mean, printing standards have definitely increased. That goes to the point about every comic book now being made an artifact. And again, the issue is not necessarily that certain formats of certain printing quality have certain price points. The more global issue is that everything goes up except the creator wages.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right.
You know?
Well, I mean, that's always been a mystery to me because starting in the 80s, my first pencil rate was $75 a page. And if you sold, and the comics were like, what, 125, somewhere around there? If you sold less than 75,000 copies, the book was canceled, right? So by the 90s, everybody's page rate had gone up, right? You might be making $300-400 a page. Comics are a little bit more expensive, but printing technology, you can go print a comic so cheap now. I mean, so incredibly cheap now, cheaper than you could, better technology. But I still think the wrench in the whole thing is the distribution. The distribution, because there are people that can make it work for Kickstarter. They can make it work for Kickstarter. And then again, the broader question for any creator is, or the most important question is, labor in versus your monthly nut that you need to make. So I think it seems that you can produce the comic, you can get the comic book done easier, you can get the printing done easier, you can get something nice, get something fast. It's the distribution that takes, if it's $1, you as a creator, what are you getting? 5 cents? 60%, 61% goes right out the door, right? 61 cents goes right out the door. And then your printing goes out the door, right? So what are you, this is the things that I learned from self-publishing, right? What Diamond took, what the printer took, and then what I was left with was my profit. Would it be worth? Would it be enough? And I think that is a very broad and individual question, right? So I always looked at it as my base as a artist was making $300 a day. If I can make $300 a day, I can make a good living, right? That may be different if you live in Idaho than if you live in Brooklyn, where your apartment might be a little bit more expensive.
Well, that's definitely a paradigm that most artists they can't take it on because there's no way they can expect it from the industry. But to your point, thankfully now we no longer have a distribution monopoly, and we do have crowdfunding, which does allow the individual to be their own business mechanism. And I think that's something that I would like to explore. So that's something definitely to talk about, because there's more than one option now. There was a time when there was only one way to do this. And if you didn't do it that way, you were really on the fringes. And the fringes is where a number of great minds came from: Robert Crumb, Roberta Gregory, and so forth. But now there are many more options. And so that's something that creators should explore as well. And we should discuss that.
Right. I mean, and the other thing I saw Eternity mentioned the black and white. Now, none of the students objected to black and white. They read manga. They did. None of them said, "Oh, this only been in color." But I do know that the black and white was a kiss of death in the direct market, because the majority of the direct market people don't like black and white comics. They want their comics in color.
I feel like that's a tie to the genre. I feel like people don't want superhero comics in black and white.
Unless Frank Miller draws them.
Or unless it's The Walking Dead. Or unless it's, I think to Steve's point, it depends what kind of book it is. It depends how it's delivered. And if younger people are ingesting black and white now more than they're ingesting color, then maybe we should think about that.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe we should think about that. Any more questions from the audience?
Well, you touched on most of them that we had in here. We kind of wove our way through them. Sort of
that's okay. Cool.
Preemptively. But we do have one here from James on the YouTube.
Okay.
Should creatives unionize or be completely independent? I don't know about the binary there, but
I'm not qualified to answer the question of should they. The question is, can they? And one of the things I pointed out in the column is that globalization makes that impossible. And there are certain legal factors that tie in. One of my lawyers, whom I may interview for a future column, can speak to this in great detail. But as long as someone from a country or a nation where the American dollar has great weight in their economy decides that they want to draw Batman, companies will go in the direction of that so that they can save money from paying someone who has a different financial structure. And so to me, the question is not should creatives unionize, because unions are an ethical thing. Without unions, what institutions are looking out for the workers? But the question is, can they? The reason Image developed a union is because it was with the staffers. But can the freelancers of the North American comic book industry unionize? As far as I can tell right now, that's not possible for a variety of reasons. And that is one of the big issues. That is truly one of the big issues.
Yeah, and I think more to your original point is, I don't think that it would be possible now. And it wasn't when they tried to do it. When Neil Adams tried to do it, they basically went and got the Filipinos and the guys from Spain and Italy. And they basically said, "Oh, you want a union? Well, we'll just hire these guys." And And I don't think with globalization, it would be a lot of effort. I mean, I went to the pro cons in the 90s. I think the best thing you could do would be something like what the Graphic Artists Guild did, which maybe if you had a guild and you had a bunch of members, you might be able to get as a group, you might be able to get discounts on things. You might be able to do the things that you could pool resources. But I still think it would be a lot of hard work. Like I'm a member as Jamar and Steve are of the National Cartoonist Society, and just trying to manage. It always sounds good on paper. Trying to manage a whole bunch of artists together is really, really, really difficult. You know, I think really the only successful union was animation, as I've talked about before. And that happened because everybody went into a building. They literally went into a factory where all unions come from, right? There's a factory, right? Comics is not a factory. Everybody's a freelancer. Everybody's a free agent, you know? And I think because of that, you could never really have a union. You know?
Yep.
I have one more thing in here for us, and thanks. Eternity is the new moderator of the chat. Guys, we need to get those thumbs up, get more likes. What are you doing? This is our last question from Eternity, and then we'll get you out of here, Joe. I'm sure you need to go pee. All right.
Okay.
Can the industry pull another Image Comics? Would that be able to shake up the market again? Are there creators that powerful anymore?
Okay, so that's 3 questions. Yes, maybe, yes.
Okay. There it is.
The industry can pull another Image, and I expect to see it no later than next year. Would that be able to shake up the market again? Possibly. It would require a group of individuals who are not only creators, but have a business strategy so they understand what levers they have to push and pull to shake up the market. Are there creators that powerful anymore? 100%.
I love it.
100%. I'm not gonna name some of them because I don't want to flip that card. That's up to them to make that decision. Although one of them is kind of like exposing himself, so I'm expecting like a revolution to come next year.
Forget it. Never mind.
Oh wow, it's gonna be called. What's it gonna be called? It's gonna be called Master of Droids.
Oh, I like that. I like it. I gotta work on my hands.
There's gonna be a new publisher called John.
Oh my God, look at that.
Right, John Comics. Right.
John Comics.
That's a good question.
John and Quarterly. That's what we'll call it.
There you go.
Joe, I don't know if you've got it in you, my man, for another episode. We ran out
You
of
want to make
runway.
this a trilogy?
Yeah, we're gonna do a part 3. We ran out of runway again. I'm so sorry. But this
is a great conversation. This is a timely conversation.
Yeah, and you know, just how your Popverse thing, it all lined up. I was like, we got to get you back on here to talk that good talk. So yeah, if you'd love to bless the live stream again with another one, we'll set it up.
Absolutely, and it's always great talking to you guys and getting that well-rounded perspective. I always come away from this learning something. So as long as we're clear that I'm also taking advantage of the 3 of you.
Well, I appreciate it. Well,
just so there's no misunderstanding about this relationship.
Everybody knows what we're walking into here. I love it. And the chat seems to like John and Quarterly. I guess
All right.
There you go.
I think a new company shall emerge.
I love it. So yeah, everybody, if you haven't already, please go and check out Joe's column on thepopverse.com.
How often does it come out?
It's going to be a monthly column because it's really got to be meaty, got to take the time. Back in the day when I wrote for CBR, that was a weekly column. It dropped every Monday, but to really dig into what we're gonna dig into, I need the time because I want it to be well-rounded. I want to be respectful to all the participants, and so I need 4 weeks. So the next one is going to drop this month.
I love it. I love it. And you heard it here first. If you haven't gotten on this train, get your ticket. Get on the Joe Illedge train.
Absolutely.
Can you sign up like a newsletter or something to be notified?
I don't know. I would say check the Popverse site and see how they set it up, but I would hope so. I'll ask the editor-in-chief Chris Arendt about that. And a bunch of you didn't get to see Mike's latest commission piece with Ghost Rider and Azrael Batman, but it was pretty sweet. It was pretty sweet.
So, all right, Joe, thank you so much. We're gonna get out of here. And look at that, Ray. Our boy Ray Anthony Height says, "I'm a Joe Illedge fan."
Oh man,
I love it.
Man, Ray Anthony Height is one of the best. Congratulations to him on finding a new publisher for Midnight Tiger, which is about to come back as a crowdfunded hardcover book. And there's an example of basically, the whole George Clooney model of one for them, one for me. It's like Ray is someone who's been working on Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur and John Constantine and characters like that. But meanwhile, he's taken some time and he's nurtured, his own company called Sky Tiger. He's bringing Midnight Tiger back. And so there are different ways to achieve the dream without losing your soul in the process.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And we have to get Ray back on for part 3. He's going to get the first Masters.
Oh jacket. Wow! He's going to be the first trilogy.
The first Masters jacket of pencil to pencil. So
okay.
I can't wait.
That's fair. That's
all
fair.
Right. All right, guys, let's pay some bills. Joe, it's been great for all of my co-hosts. I'm JAMAR Nicholas. This has been Pencil to Pencil. I guess we're out of the pandemic. I'm not so sure. But I would be remiss if I did not tell you guys to come on, put them up. Come on, Joe, get those hands ready. Wash those curvy hands.
The curvy hands.
And we'll see you next time. See you next Wednesday. Thank you guys.
All right.
All right. Bye.